allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Present at tonight's meeting are all three Finance Committee members. The staff members present are our CFO, Tanya Crosby, Reggie Murphy, William Saunders, and Robin Cushenberry. We do have a quorum of the board present this evening. Mr. Campbell, Dr. Blatz, Mr. Smith, Mr. Dowling are present with us as well this evening. We have a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second. All in favor of approving the agenda? The vote is unanimous. All right, first up, public comments. Mike Gleason.
There's nobody else?
You're it.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, I brought this up at a previous meeting. I thought I'd bring it up again. I saw the agenda. It looked like the right time to do it. And just food for thought. I suggested at that time, I suggest again tonight, okay, that the procurement board be amended to delete financial advisors as exempt from the procurement code. Well, the reasons behind that: one or no bid arrangements will get you in trouble every time. That's a fact. Now, most of you have probably heard about the South Carolina Association of Government Office lawsuit with Skagel and a couple of other advisors, and I'm not making a judgment on who's right and wrong there. That'll be sorted out in the court of law. So we'll find out who the good actors are and who the bad actors are, as a result of that. But I just want to point something out. I see what I see is a conflict of interest at this point. Mr. Saunders is a secretary-treasurer of Skagel. Okay, and as such, he has a fiduciary responsibility to both organizations. Okay, so it's hardly, it's hardly an arm's length situation. It's hard to know at this point if he's representing the interest of Skagel tonight or Beaufort County School District. I know that other superintendents are on the board as well. It doesn't impress me. Okay, it just gives the overall air, the good old boys club that gets together. And that's about all I had to say. Just consider, as you select financial advisors, that you do it competitively, out in the open, and you can never go wrong doing everything in the daylight. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mike. Points well received. Next item up on the agenda is the approval of our May 9th Finance Committee meeting minutes.
So moved.
So moved. Second. All in favor of approval of the minutes?
Can we discuss?
Sorry, discussion.
I just wanted to ask Robin, did you double check on
I
that?
did, and I changed,
cards?
you said procurement, so that's why
I said procurement, I didn't say anything about district cards.
not the card.
Because my intention was with regard to all procurement, not just cards.
Right, you did say procurement, so I
Okay.
changed it to procurement.
I mean, we certainly can start there though, but I just wanted to get clarification
Yes.
on that, and I don't know if things should be amended on the minutes or not,
I changed I had changed corrected the minutes to say, I thought I corrected them to say
it
procurement.
does say of all district cards.
Okay,
So I just wanted to be known that it was an entire procurement audit, not just restricted to the cards.
okay,
So if we could omit that,
yes, I'll correct that.
thank you.
Where is it?
It's on the second page, and it says, yeah, of all district cards. So I was intending for instructional, everything.
Your words were doing 100% procurement audit, is what your words were.
How about it?
All right, so acceptance of the minutes with that one edit that Dr. Wisniewski presented. All in favor? So the vote is unanimous. And Robin, thank you for promptly uploading all of our minutes after our finance committee meetings. You've been doing an excellent job there. I appreciate that, and all of the associated documents as well. All right, first order of business, it deserves a little background information for those who weren't with us at our previous meeting. Dr. Wisniewski put a motion forward, which was seconded, for a procurement audit. Discussion followed, and Dr. Wisniewski then tabled her motion. However, it did not receive a second, so it was not successfully tabled, and we are taking it up again this evening. Okay. So, Dr. Wisniewski, I'm going to hand things over to you. It was your motion, and
So, I think that where the confusion lied with it being a matter of just cards was we have been also discussing the cards and the audit that did take place. Now it's just a sampling, and some didn't feel that it was a full representative view of the cards. So I certainly would be open in segmenting it, but I think that it's appropriate for us to do an audit of our procurement process, and we can start in chunks, because I know, Dick, one of your concerns was the scope of it being so large. So I'd love to open up discussion about that.
I hope that we have feedback from the staff on the cost and the cost, total time cost, money cost, scope of the overall procurement. We have that.
I don't have any documentation, but I have information I can share. So each year we are required to have a formal audit performed, and each one of 3 years we are required to have a procurement audit by the State Department of Education. The district chooses and pays extra to have that one of every 3-year audit annually, and we have for as long as I've been with the district, for many years. So we do a procurement audit, or procurement audit is performed by the auditors. And in compliance with specific requirements by the state. There is a procurement audit guideline that is required by the state. The last one was performed this past year and was issued, the statement was issued, or the opinion was issued on December 1st, 2018.
okay, I have that, and I'm going to distribute it to committee members. But I want to point out to everyone here that all of our procurement audits are uploaded to our district website. If you go up to the search box and you type in procurement audits, you will see for the past several years. But I'll send you the most recent one now. Okay.
And the findings?
There are no findings. There have been no findings in either the annual audit or the procurement audit for the last, I believe, 19 years. So I reached out yesterday to our existing external financial auditors to get an idea of cost. And without some specifics, we sort of made some estimates. And at the time, I believe the motion to be all district P cards. So I reached out to our procurement staff. There are 35,000 approximate transactions annually on the P card. My request of the current external auditor was, can you give me a ballpark dollar amount of what a procurement audit of district P cards totaling 35,000 transactions might be? And with some very rough estimates, the lowest number possible with spending 2 minutes per transaction would be about $275,000 was that number. So what we also did, I believe that number may climb because you will have to understand the procurement code and the P card policies in order to understand whether each transaction not only was proper and reasonable and those sorts of things, but also complied with both of our policies. So I think that number may climb, and it would certainly climb if it were encompassing all of the procurement process, because then you have accounts payable invoices to add to that, which I don't have a number on yet. And you will have contracts and RFPs and Qs and IFBs, all of the procurement methodologies that we use. So a number of transactions would be added to that, but that gives you a kind of a frame of reference. We also took the latest procurement card audit that was done this past year or so ago, year and a half ago. And that audit was performed about 200 plus transactions in the sample, and it was 66,000. So if we multiply that number out by 35,000, we're gonna get in the range of $7 million. So of course, there will be some economies of scale, and that number could be down, but that's just some of the ways that we are trying to determine what would the range be, and what would the scope be. But one interesting comment from the external auditor was, I'm not sure how to give you this answer because I've never had this question asked before. So that was the last point I wanted to make for you, and we have to take any questions if you have any.
So I'm looking at the Finance Committee scope, and in general, procurement is part of our scope. But in regard to reviewing our procurement card program, we only committed to reviewing the controls. And we made a commitment very early on as a committee not to review transactions per se, unless they were brought forward, unless a community member, someone had a question about a specific transaction or so. So my interest in this motion, which I think we ought to look at an audit on procurement compliance to our code, our own code, state and federal guidelines.
So an audit of the code itself, of this document?
An audit of compliance. Are we complying with everything that's in our procurement code? Are we?
I think that our procurement code, our procurement audit is already doing that. What I thought of was perhaps we need to expand the scope and request additional transactions to be looked at or
And
some
that is the
investment.
limitation of our existing annual audit. It's so limited in scope. What would it cost if we used our existing auditors, Elliott and Davis, who we have for one more year? Have we looked into what it would cost for them to expand? What they usually use as a sampling, or are we too late for that? I don't know.
I don't know the answer to that. They've already been, they've done field work, this past week. They were on site.
Yes.
And then they'll be back at the end of August, early September. We can certainly ask. They're usually very accommodating to whatever our needs are, if it's within reason for them. So we can certainly ask, what would it take to expand? How would we word that? How would we expand that for you? Perhaps doubled sample size or something like that, and what would that additional cost be? I can reach
Would
out
you
to
be
them.
able to get back to us with a response from Elliott Davis
Yes.
to see if that would be
Yes.
doable? Would either of our two finance committee members be interested in something like
Well, I
that?
have a question, and the question is, if we just had the audit and procurement was looked at as part of the normal 1/3 every 3-year audit, and we just got the report last year, and we got a no findings, seems to me that if we're going to, we must have some suspicion in some area that's causing this request for a procurement audit. And so if, obviously the procurement audit didn't find anything, so what is the suspicion, or what particular part of procurement are we concerned about? I have to take the past report and say, I don't see one. But maybe somebody else on the committee does see an area where you're concerned about the procurement process. And if so, then you should bring that up and the reason why you think that particular area needs to be looked at again or expanded in future procurement audits that come every 3 years. So that's what my question is.
Yeah, the annual, Tanya, you stated that the district chooses to do it annually. Is it a 100% audit or is it just?
It's not,
it's
every
sampling?
audit that we have is a sampling. I don't know the exact number, I'd have to go back and look. at the
That's
report,
where-
so.
Not necessarily a suspicion on any one particular area or anything like that, it's that I think that a 100% audit at this, it was my question last meeting, is that we've never had one, or at least none that you could recall of.
Never, it would be very rare to actually perform one because of the it being so cost prohibitive, so in a governmental agency. So the audit is generally designed to provide a sampling, and it's about risk. If you identify certain number of transactions that have exceptions to that, to what they should have, to compliance or any of that, then they will take another sample. And then if that identifies an exception or 2 or 3, depending on the numbers of exceptions that may occur, then they go deeper. And then deeper and deeper until they may find, that you have an extremely high risk in this area, and then it may evolve into something else. But generally, the first sample, if there's, nothing found, then they may not go deeper. So it's all about risk, and the risk of either materially misstating the financial statements or non-compliance with the procurement code or some other federal law. So.
Well, let me just provide one example. Looking at this audit from 2018, I just want to read the procurement card piece. And they did it, they looked into a number of areas, our district minority business plan, many, many aspects of our procurement code. But just to give you an idea of the limitations of this, and I know not everybody has it in front of them, so I'm just going to read aloud. It's a couple sentences. We tested procurement card purchases incurred for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2018 for compliance with district's procurement code. We tested 6 procurement card monthly statements of 6 selected employees and 3 monthly procurement statements for 3 department schools selected, for a total of 9 procurement card statements. No exceptions were noted. So yes, it's a random sampling, but it's a very small sampling given the extent of our procurement card program. So that's one area that I would think we might want to look into, and our commitment as a finance committee is review the Beaufort County School District's procurement card program controls. Now, we can't do that as the finance committee. We would need someone, we would need an auditor to do that. So you could call it a program controls. You can look at it as a compliance audit. If you want to accept an amendment to your motion, let me get the original motion up here. All right, let me see. I don't see the motion. Robin, do you have the motion up in board docs?
Should be on the minutes.
When you're looking for that,
We took out the-
can I ask, Madam Chair, can I ask the CFO question? We had the procurement card audit, they didn't find anything. But within a few months later, we had a budget clerk at one of the schools who was found embezzling money from a P-card account, correct?
Correct.
How was that problem found?
Internal controls.
Internal controls? And
Yes.
how long did this problem sustain itself before it was discovered by internal controls?
It was between, I don't know the time frame. I would say about 3 months. It began on a very small scale with additional office supplies that looked normal on P-card, and then evolved into, there were problems in multiple areas of the district. We had some deposit corrections, so I had a staff member approached me that there was a deposit correction and deposit was under-reported at the bank or was short. Another P-card administrator informed me that the P-card reports were late on a repetitive basis and the proper documents weren't scanned in on time. And then a third person commented that, then I had some two procurement violations within a couple of weeks' time. So when I learned that all three were occurring, I sent Mr. Saunders out. He's a former auditor. I sent him out with another staff member to visit the bookkeeper, and we discovered that her appearance, the lack of organization in the office, many things were red flags, but no clear evidence at the time, and a resistance to allow us to help her. So all of those things were red flags. We came back, we began monitoring very closely, and over a weekend, we found some charges that are prohibited on the P-card. So it made it clear that she took the card home and she used it for personal purposes. So Monday morning, we shut the card down first thing in the morning, and then by the afternoon, we were visiting her on site to terminate her.
Now, since the audit didn't find this, but your internal audit found it,
Did the audit find it?
No.
Okay.
The P-card audit had already been completed, and it was a time frame that ended before the occurrence of the transactions. So, yeah.
so that begs the question, do we need to make sure that our internal audit did the job? I mean, it took 3 months, but it was a small thing, and all the transactions that were done. What is an auditor going to tell us? What did you learn from that? Did you change anything from that experience?
Well, yes, we, at the advice of Mr. Saunders, actually, anytime we have alerts in that nature, we have a shared document that we report those in a shared document. So we document that there was a deposit correction at this school, at this location. And is there a flag transaction where the documents are late? We indicate that as well. And so that is monitored by Mr. Saunders, and then we're constantly looking at that to ensure that are there any red flags. But generally, there's a sense in the department as we communicate about things that we're on high alert. The combination of those things helped us to catch the problems.
Now, was there any prior indications about the honesty and integrity of that bookkeeper?
No.
Okay. You see, that's why I wanted to have an annual credit check on every member that has a P card, because I will be willing to bet you that had we done that, we probably would have seen somebody that was in debt, was having problems paying payments on time, and that would be able to have their supervisor alert that individual and say, your credit rating looks pretty bad, and you need credit counseling. And oh, by the way, we're going to be checking on you. I checked with Alice.
Well, we will take it, but we can't discuss this matter only because it's not on the agenda today.
Okay, well, I'm
It's
using
separate in nature.
I'm using this as an example of, rather than doing an audit that's expensive,
Okay.
we should be looking at ways to preclude these things from happening rather than discovering them on an audit. So prevention
Yes.
is probably a more cost-effective means than a constant auditing.
Yeah, and I think that may be a matter, it may be a matter for the operations committee, since they have HR under their purview, and that would be an HR-related topic, and hopefully we can pass that off to them for a future discussion, question.
I was just gonna say, I didn't hear what Mr. Guy is saying, but I don't see nothing wrong with having the audit. With going forward, that proposal came to the full board, because there's nothing wrong with double checking. And just to say that incidents happened after the audit does not mean that, I also listened to what she said. She said there was a pattern of behavior that had alerted them. What if that pattern of behavior did not alert them? She said that they were late turning in their reports and stuff like that. So what if they was not late? This could be happening over a period of time, so why not have a actual full audit? I just think that, after listening to hearing her, then I'm kind of inclined to.
It's the cost issue.
But we spend money on a lot of things that we could possibly be saving money by checking and also coming up with a systematic
Because we
system.
need to know the cost and see if it fits in the budget, because it's a budget issue.
Now, Rachel.
No, I certainly want to echo what Will's saying, and that's something that I mentioned before. I think there's a couple different things. You can be proactive and reactive, or you can be both. And I think we need to be both, which would encompass our internal controls and also an audit. I do understand that there's a cost associated with it, and I agree with you that we have to make sure that we, number one, find a firm that's capable of handling something like that, or break it up. That's why I said maybe we need to break it up and take it in chunks. Where's the best place for us to start on that kind of thing? The issue I have is that there's a lot of potentials for human error and breakdown in human response to the controls right now. And I want to make sure that we're doing everything to stop any potential errors going forward.
All right, let me remind everyone that the committee can make no decisions. All we can do is bring forth the recommendation to the full board. That's it, really. So I'd like to offer an amendment to the motion. For the motion to say, I move that the Finance Committee recommend to the full board a procurement card program compliance and controls audit. Is there a second to that amendment?
Say that again, procurement code compliance controls.
Procurement card program compliance and controls audit.
I'll second so we can discuss.
Then in the discussion,
Discussion,
Madam Chairman,
yes.
I cannot support that motion because I believe that we have a procurement audit that's every 3 years with no findings. We had a small event that was found by our internal controls, and that the cost of doing a complete audit of P-card, and we haven't said in the motion what the scope, how many P-card transactions will be looked at. We're looking at 35,000 P-card transactions in a year. Now, could we focus it, say, just on the bookkeepers? Because maybe it's normally when you find out you have a problem, it's normally at very low levels. People that are in debt and other things, that's maybe you could scan it down to, say, the bookkeepers 1 year, and the next year you do the maintenance department, or the next year you do the facilities, or you do it on a random basis. So every P-card owner knows that, hey, you're liable to be audited every year, but to just have an open audit, 100% audit, one that is just a snapshot, not a motion picture. it's a snapshot in time. And you need to have, for somebody that's thinking about misusing P-card, they say, well, the audit's over with, I won't have to worry about it for 3 years. But if it's it's a continuous random process of a small number, or an affordable number, I should say, an affordable number, I could support that. But the scope has to be limited to make it, for me to understand why I would support a 35,000 P-card transaction audit once a year. It's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to have a very limited payback on that
I
investment.
had Rachel first, then Angel.
Can I ask Tanya a question? How much currently do we pay for you said we do it annually though?
Yes.
We choose to do it annual.
55,000.
So we pay 55,000 currently, you said the quote was 275, so
For 35 trans.
for the full 35, so roughly additional or less? Would you take?
Additional, it'd be a separate, it'd be a separate engagement.
Separate engagement, okay.
Mhm.
I want a clarification on that, and, I certainly like the idea of rotating it on a random basis, just because I think that does something to keep, like you said, to keep people, in check. So, I like what John said.
Just 2 comments. One, I think, is more germane to the main motion, so I'll skip that. But if this were brought to the full board, I would support it because of the word control. All the talk so far seems to be on transaction analysis, which is all after the fact, rather than on preventative controls. It's kind of like what a police department struggles with. Do you catch criminals or do you try to stop crime from happening? So I think that an audit of controls and compliance is even more beneficial than auditing 35,000 transactions.
And that's what the motion is.
Right, that's why I would support it if it was brought to the full board.
Robin, would you repeat the motion for us, what you have? Or the amendment, excuse me.
Recommend to the full board a procurement card program, code compliance and controls audit.
And can I maybe, I think that what would possibly help Dick to feel a little bit more comfortable with this is that we can recommend to the full board that, but maybe we should just recommend firstly to find out what the actual, we have a quote, it's a rough quote based on kind of what Tanya discussed with them, but he doesn't know what the motion obviously was gonna say, so maybe we put it out there that we're going to find out what the quote would be, and then we'll revisit what our recommendation will be. Or go forward to the board and say, okay, we got a quote, this is how much it's gonna be, do we want to go forward with this? I think that once we have a finite number, it might be a little bit more powerful for the remainder of the board also.
Well, if we were to bring a recommendation to the board and they were to adopt it, assuming that's the case, what would then happen would be, we'd put out we'd advertise, and then that information would come back to us, how much it would cost, and then the board would make a determination from there, you know? So the commitment at the committee level is not much, we're simply bringing it forward to the board. Even the commitment at the board level is not much, you know, you're putting it out, like we do with our auditors for, you know, an RFP, to see what would come down. And then that information would be brought back to the board, and the board could decide, is it worth it, is it not worth it? So there's relatively low risk in this, right?
I'm just sitting there listening to what y'all are saying. And to me, I'd rather be transparent and I'd rather to catch it. If something is there versus not being, if there's something that I'd rather catch it versus not catching it. And then I'd rather catching and being able to stop losing thousands of dollars versus paying nothing and not doing nothing at all. I really believe that I see no problem with doing it. I mean, and here we're not wasting taxpayers' money because there's a lot of emails coming in. There's a lot of people that saying that there's clearly that there's been P-card uses that has been we've had to dispute. So I think that we can, that we're now showing the taxpayers that we are working on it, and this is a step that we have taken, because I mean, in return, they want to know that we are actually engaged on these situations.
Thank you, Will. And
So-
if this goes forward to the board, you'll have your chance at that opportunity
Right.
to say all of these points. And remember, I'm gonna call for the vote on the amendment. Our scope says review of the Beaufort County School District's procurement card program controls. All we're doing here is taking it to the next level, a more thorough level, and we're recommitting to that.
It was also, I really wanted that. I was kind of also, in the ending, I wanted to just ask Mr. Geyer.
Call for the vote if you hold your comment for just a moment.
Okay, but actually it was pertaining, yeah, it was pertaining.
To the
yeah.
amendment.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Go
I
on.
was going to ask Mr. Geyer, in reference to the amendment, what would ease your mind to that amendment to make it?
You know, I agree with what John said, that looking at audit of the controls
Right.
makes some sense to me, because that's not committing us to hiring an audit firm to look at 35,000 or 10,000 or 2,000 transactions. It's looking at the language and the way our policy is executed at the district level for P-cards. So,
And that is the amendment. The
And that is the
amendment
amendment.
is
and I can
procurement
support that.
program compliance
Sure.
audit,
That
compliance
won't be
and
as expensive.
controls.
That won't be that
audit.
expensive.
Okay, we got it. All right, all in favor of the amendment? Raise your hand. Vote is unanimous. So I'm not certain if I need to take a vote on the full motion because we've
just
adopted the
becomes your
full.
motion.
Yes.
If I have if I reach out to auditors or, well, are you, okay, if this were, am I expected to bring back information going to the?
Here's the deal. We bring the finance committee brings a recommendation to the full board to do this. Only the full board can direct the superintendent. Okay,
So I
so,
should just hold tight.
it'll be Dr. Rodriguez by the time this gets in front of the full board. The full board can't direct Tanya to do anything. We can direct the superintendent.
This
So
goes to the board on Tuesday.
now, I have a motion. I move that, I move that the committee postpone a report on all recommendations coming out of today's meeting to the first board meeting in July. Is there a second?
Second.
What day is that?
There's only one board meeting in July, which is July 9th.
Oh. Are you going to do
I will, but I wouldn't be for the next one.
All right, discussion, let me just say, let me clarify why I'm doing that. Because two of us are not gonna be present for our board meeting on Tuesday. And I always like to have at least two committee members present, just as a sounding board in case one of us misses a point. So any and all recommendations coming out of today's committee meeting will be presented and summarized on at the July meeting. So, committee members, all in favor of that motion? Unanimously approved. Okay. Right. Moving on to our next order of business, the budget variance report. We're at our quarterly mark, a little bit beyond, and that is one of the items on the finance committee's scope. Tanya?
I don't have a presentation
Okay.
today, just have the quarterly financial report available to you. I hit some highlights a few board meetings ago. This document has reports all funds, beginning with just a narrative summary and then some details of the revenues, expenditures of the general fund, and any variances are on the far right-hand side with percentages that will be used depending on whether they're revenues or expenditures. So these are, about almost 3 months old at this point, and so we'll have a little more information in our next quarterly report that Be happy to take any questions you have regarding that.
Can I ask a question? When do you start to cross level?
Cost level?
Cross level from one budget account to another? As if you see an account that's, it's approaching its limits or going over its limits, and you have another account that's underspent for whatever reason, do you cross level, and when do you do that?
I'm not familiar with that terminology, so I don't know
Okay.
what cost level.
Change,
So if I'm
shifting from budget accounts to another budget account. And
Um,
who authorizes that?
the board would have to authorize any items over $50,000 that we're shifting.
Understand.
So any items over 5,000 require my approval.
Okay.
So, any indication that, there is a need for a transfer, bookkeepers have the authority to, or the ability, capability of requesting a budget transfer, and then it comes through our office for approval.
And have you had any this year?
Yes, we have a number of them. Generally, they're small and under the 5,000 range. But as the schools have the authority within their individual, and the departments within their individual budget to move within the allocated budget, they can't exceed the budget. They don't have the ability to exceed.
Right, right. And
So
no-
it is non-salary. They don't have access to non-salary accounts, and they're prohibited from any externally generated accounts such as maintenance or custodial and that sort of thing. So they are able to, if they're spending a little more in supplies and they didn't travel, then they can shift
Right.
some of those funds over, and we have the ability to review that and approve it.
And there has been no major fund transfers?
I don't believe I have come to the board this year for a request. The only item I recall is the impact fee request. That did require not a budget transfer, but a transfer of funds to cover those expenses. In previous years, there may have been a staff member that we needed to pay in another funding source, and I've come forward to the board. So if I've had one, it's possibly one a year. Is about the average.
I ask this when I see the salaries, office of the superintendent at 168%. And the other items in that particular group will not cover that shortfall.
That's correct. There were 2 superintendents paid in the
Right.
fiscal year.
And so are you going to be coming to us to have a fund transfer for that?
I have not planned to. There was no decision of what funding source to bring forward to compensate for that. So,
But it's going to be over $50,000. It appears it's $84,000
yes,
right now.
yes.
So how do you account for that?
We have identified some savings in a couple other areas, so we can bring those forward to the board and identify that and cover those.
Sounds like
with
you're
some
going to need
savings.
to.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was uncertain as to whether we would have much or not, but due to the budget situation, we have held off on some expenses recently. And so that may generate some savings to have us be able to do that, yes.
Tanya, on page 17, under our debt service, our tax anticipation note interest, we're at 300% of the percent used.
Yes.
Can you speak to them?
Sure. 17. So each year, the TAN is issued, and we draw down in approximately September or October. So we draw the funds. Last year, in this fiscal year, we issued $9 million. We requested $9 million. They're drawn down in a series of payments. And then we are required by law to pay them back by a certain time frame. I believe it's in April or so. We pay them as soon as tax revenues come in January. We begin to make those principal and interest payments going back. The TAN has a in the SCAGO. It's managed by the SCAGO, South Carolina Association of Governmental Organizations. It's sort of an investment, sort of the analogy is an investment pool, like the local government investment pool that we invest with our bond proceeds at the county level. It's very much like that. It is a nonprofit organization that pools all of the bond issues for the TAN and some other sorts of bonds called installment purchase. So those resources are pooled together to borrow one very large bond statewide, and then as we pull our portion down, those funds are provided to us, and when they're due, we pay them back. Then there is once all of the interest rates, the calculations are made of how much each district really owed in interest in the actual amounts based on the time frame they paid them back, and the length of time they borrowed those dollars. We are subject to a rebate. So the rebate generally comes to us late in the fiscal year in the fourth quarter. And this year, I'm pretty certain, if Billy, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was $92,000. Is that correct?
I don't know if it's quite that high.
Okay.
I could look it up. I'll look it up.
So
It was a large number.
So our expense looks very large, and then we have a rebate that goes right back in and offsets it, and generally it comes in close to budget.
So the 79,000 that were in the hole, you think that
It will not be in the hole when we get
it'll
done.
be covered when
Yes,
the
yes.
rebate comes
And the
in?
rebate comes in as a wire transfer directly into our bank accounts, and when we record it, and then it offsets against that account, so it lowers it, and we'll come under budget this year.
Yeah. SCAGO, I've heard that and Billy could probably answer this better, but that it benefits the smaller districts throughout the state who participate. That someone, a district our size and larger, we're not really reaping the benefits of participating through SCAGO.
I wouldn't agree with that. It actually benefits every district because you're pooling your resources and everyone gets the benefit of the lower interest rates because the interest rate will be the same for all. And it also has, you're now distributing the bond issue costs. So legal fees and financial advisor fees that are associated with those bonds are then distributed proportionately based on the amount that you borrow. So you're spreading those costs over a larger number of districts, and you're spreading, gaining a better interest rate than you would if you went outside to borrow on your own. And so your interest rates are very low. So
Have you ever done an analysis of the interest rates through SCAGO versus
no,
under
but I'm
FTE?
sure our financial advisor could certainly do that for us.
Yeah, and then that's not on the agenda, but I'm just curious, SCAGO came up.
I'm sure they have done that to show the benefits of it because for pooling your resources. And generally, that's what the government investment pool does as well. And so they're able to have better buying power sort of and better interest rates as they pool the money together. So.
Are any of the funds deposited insured?
Federally deposit insured.
Insured in any way?
No, the funds are collateralized. Governmental funds are required that any bank or entity that's holding, they have to have a collateralization process where they have to hold securities in the amount of the deposit. And so that's all across all governmental agencies.
FDIC approves up to like
FDIC doesn't apply
$200,000 or
to
something.
governmental
Anything
deposits.
over that is backed by
It's a whole different set of laws. It's a collateralization. And the auditors look at that every year to ensure that we're adequately collateralized.
What collateralizes what?
It's the banks are the ones responsible for the collateralization process. to guarantee that our balance, whatever our balance, X number of dollars, the bank has to ensure they're holding enough securities to collateralize or guarantee that deposit.
Whose securities?
The bank does that, and we can request a copy of it if we so chose to.
I'm gonna email you with more questions. I got questions about that.
On page, what page is this? 25, I believe. And it lists out the capital projects, the percentage used, and the leftover. I know we recently voted on this, correct? Where we took that amount that was left over, the operations brought forward a suggestion. You see it's 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. It's kind of what I was looking at. Do we know when that's going to occur?
Robert Auden could speak better to that, but I know that for example, the 2015, we discussed that multiple times. Those are PA systems, announcement systems in the schools. And so those are committed to upgrading our PA systems in the schools. And they are working on a project to upgrade certain facilities. I don't know exactly which schools there are. The 2016 funds are the leftover May River High School funds from the construction of funds that were approved there. And so the individual reports should show the locations of the remaining funds, but in general, these are committed, and so Robert Auding, I think his task was to go back and see if there were any that are uncommitted. But it takes us a few years to accomplish the summer projects, and so they may go back a few years, but certainly the PA funds are on my radar to make sure that we're wrapping those up and seeing if there are any uncommitted or unneeded funds, but I know that there are PA systems that are very much in need throughout the district, so I wouldn't imagine that those aren't needed.
These are only for use in capital, correct?
That's correct.
So we don't really know when any of that's going to, we have to ask Robert when that's
He
going to be
has
wrapped
a
up.
schedule of his projects, and so we have to provide the schedules that show when those will be finished. Yeah. And the 2016 of 768,000, I think 500,000 of that was recently committed to the Hilton Head High School HVAC project.
Right.
So there will be a remaining, say, 260,000 or so on that would be, could be combined to do something and bring back before the board is uncommitted.
Does anybody recall what the directive was on that, what those remaining funds, how they were supposed to be rolled? Or where? It was supposed to be rolled to the general,
into the
General fund.
but we didn't specify a year, did we?
I don't think
Just
so.
whenever they.
all the leftovers.
I don't think there was a date.
Well, we can't roll them into the general fund, we can roll them into
Into
the
the
And then to
8%
the
capital.
not general.
Yeah, because they're bonds, so we can't put them in the general fund, but we can roll them to a most current and offset borrowings so use those funds to possibly offset the, so instead of issuing 20 million and say we had 500,000 uncommitted, we would borrow 19,000 or 19,500,000 or something like that, so lower the borrowings. I think was the intent of the motion, so. I'll follow up with Robert to just
Yeah, I'll shoot him an
where
email
he is
or
in
something.
that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on the budget area report at this time? All right, it's roughly 5 to 6. We're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, a review of the procurement code. And I can't imagine that this will be the only time that we take a look inside the pages of our rather large procurement code, but this is certainly a start, and one that's overdue. Tanya's given us a number of supplemental documents here, just to summarize for everybody. A list of some some changes that have been made along the way to our procurement code. A brief summary document which just sort of touches on the highlights. And a third document which was requested by Mr. Dowling actually in regards to our procurement code exemptions. And exemption meaning items that are not bound by or free from the usual procurement guidelines, putting them out, for competitive bidding. So, and the list is rather extensive. I'd like to begin discussions with exemptions. Speaking of exemptions, which I believe fall on page, starting on page 12, is it? Let's see. Good document, bear with us, folks. Okay, yes, 15, 14?
14,
14, thank you, bottom of page 14.
starting with E, paragraph
Before we begin, I just want to reiterate a critical paragraph here, section B on page 14, that the authority and duties of the Board of Education. Okay, just a reminder that the authority to promulgate policies, the Board of Education has the ultimate authority and responsibility to promulgate policies governing procurement, management, control, and disposal of any and all supplies, services, equipment, and construction to be procured by the district. Such policy shall be binding in all procurement made by the district. Non-delegation, the Board of Education shall not delegate its power to promulgate policies. And board oversight, then we'll move on to other areas. The Board of Education as a whole should consider and decide matters of policy within provisions of this code, including those referred to by the superintendent. Okay, so we have the ultimate authority. Sometimes I'm not certain we're aware of that. The Board of Education shall have the power to audit and monitor the implementation of its policies and the requirements of this code. So us moving forward with our recommendation today is well defined within the code here for an audit. I'm going to put a motion on the floor here to begin discussions. I move that the Finance Committee recommend to the full board that financial advisors as a category be removed as a listed exemption from the Beaufort County School District Procurement Code. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, discussion.
Why would they ever list it as? Does anybody know?
Yes.
Good question. Great question.
So, a financial advisor is, I don't know if many would compare that to much of an auditor, but they're very different in scope. A financial advisor has to develop a relationship with the district and its staff in order to build a plan based on historical information and what your goals are going forward. It involves teamwork with the superintendent, the CFO, and others, and the advisor themselves, and the bond counsel. You have to have an understanding of circumstances that the district has encountered in the past, and its relationship with county council as well. You've got to be abreast of all aspects of the district. For example, the operating budget this year, we are going to have a shortfall in tax revenue. It could very well affect our bond rating. So that has a direct impact on the advice and the decisions that we make in our debt plan. So in the debt plan, there was a goal of getting to the district to a point where you had great debt capacity. You were able to pay bonds back in 8% bonds back in 3 years as opposed to 4 or 5 years. So you're paying that debt back faster, and you're bringing your bond rating up. So, and the goal was to get it to that AA1, which we are at. So it's a long-term relationship that's built over time and allows the individuals to work as a team to move the district forward. So that is the reason for allowing it to be, instead of, if you're changing every 5 years or more, then you have to rebuild and start over again with that understanding and that relationship. So it makes sense if you are pleased with that relationship and they're being provided the services, that you have the ability and the flexibility within the code to maintain that.
How long have we had this guy?
About 15 years. So 2000, in the 2000 range, possibly.
Tanya, you're referring to Compass Municipal Advisors, or they are
That's our
only,
only financial
there are
advisor.
only
Yes,
financial
that's correct.
advisors,
Yes.
okay. Are you
15 years?
15.
I can't, and
That's
I don't
about right.
know exactly, but
It was
it was
early
really on.
2000s.
We had a financial advisor prior to him,
Yes.
and we were having difficulties with communication and with reporting to the accountants the proper information we needed to record in the financial statements. So I recall, because I was doing the journal entries at that time, really struggling with the information we were getting as far as reports. So that was two of the reasons why we switched.
So what the motion says is, it would no longer be, you wouldn't get to choose as the administration who we want as our financial advisors, okay? We would have to put it out for competitive bidding. So that's what this motion does. It removes it as an exemption, okay? So that administration can't just select.
Administration did not select this one. It was actually, not sure if it was it was an RFP because it was before the exemption existed. So the board did do that. It would, at any time, the board can say we're not satisfied with the current vendor, we don't have a contract.
Yes.
And so they could say that, we're interested in moving to someone else, and then we could, certainly I wouldn't go before, because this relationship has to involve the board, not just me or staff or the superintendent. You have to be comfortable with the district's financial advisor as well. So it's not something that I would take authority to do, but this would allow you flexibility to maintain that long-term relationship.
Rachel.
So, I'm looking at this and it references South Carolina codes 1135, 710 and 5919, 270, and I pulled them up and they're not as extensive as this list. So that concerns me about how these additional items were listed in here.
The exemptions.
Under the exemptions, yeah. So it references those codes, leading me to believe, okay, that's where they got this from, but then there's ones in here that don't apply. The code's definitely not as extensive. It talks about livestock feed and veterinary supplies, so. And also looking at the exemptions, I see other things that we may want to review as being possible exemptions. For example, item 6, where it says policy and legal services to include but not limited to, and it lists attorney services. And a legislative consultant. So I think that we need to do a review of all of these exemptions, not just the one. I think we need to look at all of them, because I think comparing them to this code, there's obviously historical reasons for why certain ones were included, but I think we need to vet them currently to see if they're still serving us now.
I have a real problem with a 15-year relationship. If for no other reason than to get a alternative, obviously we pay for this,
Yes,
Well, how much do we pay?
it's through our bond issues. Anytime a bond is issued,
This is a percentage?
it's a
Yes.
portion of the
Percentage.
cost, yes.
It's consequent to a trade.
Okay. I understand what you're saying, but competition is a powerful tool, and take competition out of this, because there's lots of financial advisors, there's lots of school districts, and to stay with one firm for 15 years in financial advisors, well, I just don't feel comfortable with that.
Mr. Dillon?
Back when I was a musician, I was always skeptical of someone who wanted to get hired into the band because they already knew all the songs. Aren't the skills, aren't the reasons that you are advocating a long-term relationship, aren't they things that a skilled financial advisor would pick up on right away, particularly if we're already using best practices?
First of all, I'm not advocating for the use of, these are just the things that you would want in a financial advisor, in a relationship with financial advisors. So I'm not advocating for or against. Whether or not the qualities are there, I'm sure there are others who are out there. Whether they're at the quality that you're seeking is another thing. Can they provide the services? Can they speak clearly to the board in a manner in which is able to be understood? Their world is very complex, and with interest rates and agreements, all sort of terminology. So to help the board understand best what its needs are and to help guide them moving forward. Also to provide the documentation that's needed and guidance to get the district in the best position. So finding someone that fits that best is the key to your relationship. If you feel that your relationship and you're not being provided with that, I can certainly see changing that if you're not being provided the service that you're looking for. So that's usually when we're unhappy with, say, cleanliness at our schools. We definitely want to, look at doing something different and moving to a different contract. So that's the point I want to make. Not every financial advisor will be able to provide the service at the level you want, and so by staying with someone, there are advantages to having that stability and continuity. So just as you would with a CFO or staff members in your schools, there's a benefit for having that long-term relationship instead of changing, every few years or something like that. So just consider that.
Mrs. Crosby, how?
John,
I'm
hold
sorry.
on a second. You'll be up after Dick.
Okay.
So we have a board policy that requires the board to change out our auditing firm every 5 years. The same argument could be made there about familiarity. Also,
That policy was actually changed a few years ago, prior to my realm. The 5-year rotation is no longer in board, the administrative rules or board policy.
is it removed
No,
from
no
board
longer.
policy?
Yes, we'll be considering Monday night a policy that would require financial advisors.
My question was, has the policy been removed, board policy, that would change the auditor every 5 years?
No, that has not been removed.
Okay.
It was
Maybe it's been
removed a couple
removed
of years ago.
as an administrative, well, we can get that.
But the
memo.
policy doesn't
Right.
require that it be changed.
Right,
Policy requires that it go out to bid every 5 years.
okay.
That's correct.
So you could end up, if you bid
Doesn't require change.
the auditor or the financial advisor, you could
Gotcha.
end up selecting the same one all over again. It's the fact that it gives you the opportunity to buy some fresh eyes into
Yes.
your operation.
Now, just to finish with my point, we don't have a contract, we have an MOA with our financial advisors. I asked for them prior to the meeting. And in the summary sheet that you gave to us, under board approval authorization actions, it says the maximum time for any multi-term contract is 7 years. and is contingent upon the superintendent's approval. Contracts exceeding 7 years must be approved by the Board of Education. So, I mean, I can't recall my time on the board, our financial advisors being brought forward for approval. I mean, it's always just been assumed that they're in place. So there is a motion on the floor. Robin, can you read the motion back
I
for
move
us?
that the finance committee recommend to the full board that financial advisors be removed from the list of exemptions.
All right, committee, any further
I
discussion?
did have one question.
Yes.
So if they are removed, then what is the next step or the process for us selecting one in the future?
Request for proposal.
Mhm.
And they can come in, you know, and
They can
and
still
bid. Sure.
compete,
Sure,
recompete, and
but we could see what a competitor would have to say, and we'd have, obviously, the incumbent would have a huge advantage because of knowledge, but it doesn't hurt us at all to look out and what else is out there. And there may be somebody that blows our socks off, you know?
So this motion doesn't naturally direct us to do an RFP. We would need some guidance on that piece as well, so.
We would bring it forward to the board, and if the board approved it, the exemption would be immediately removed. And the board would have to look at our current MOA that we had with Compass Municipal Advisors. And I'm looking for it now. Once I find it, I'll send it out to everybody. I want to say it's a month-to-month kind of a deal. We have to provide 30 days notice, something of that nature.
so
So it's pretty informal. It's an MOA, it's not contract.
And I'd just like to note as
Yes.
well, depending on what the vote happens in November, you're entering into a very long-term commitment
Correct.
to funding.
So time is an
So,
issue.
I would just keep that in mind. We've had, guidance set forward, to do the bond issues with the current advisor, so just that.
A new
can happen.
advisor may advise differently, you're saying, we may get contradictory advice. And I can respect that, and that would have to be a conversation for the board.
we don't have that MOA anywhere?
Let me dig it up. I have it.
I want to check that escape clause, just to make sure that we're not
Right, bear with me
putting ourselves in
here.
a precarious or contentious.
Bear with us, everyone. Yeah, different. Let's see.
Sent you from staff member?
I requested them, I'm trying to think if I requested them from Tanya or Dr. Berg.
It wasn't me.
Okay,
I
they must have been
believe I
Dr.
talked to
Berg.
them.
Usually, he makes a practice of distributing to the full board. So it may be, it may be somewhere in your inbox. Let's see here.
never seen it.
I don't remember any of it. Is there any way to maybe amend the motion just to cover that?
What were your
I just-
concerns
I know
about
it's,
the?
it wouldn't necessarily, you know, there may be some that say it's contract, some that say it's not. I just wanna make sure that we're
Well,
not
This motion has nothing to do with with the municipal, Compass Municipal Advisors contract.
No, I know,
This
but
motion only removes it as an exempted item on our, in our procurement code. That's it. Now, if the board wants to proceed further from there, that's the board's decision. That wouldn't be ours. All we're doing here is recommending that financial advisors be removed as an exemption. That's it. That would allow you time to review the existing MOA. Okay.
because it's obviously
With that-
gonna become a conversation though. I mean,
It will.
that's the.
It will in July,
It'll-
because none
yeah,
of these,
in July when we
this is
bring
gonna be a
forward.
heck of a committee in July. There's a number of pretty heavy topics here coming out, so it's best it's not being reviewed on Tuesday. So, if there are not any other questions, let's go ahead and vote on that motion. Okay, all in favor of the motion, bringing that forward to the board? Vote is unanimous.
Okay, can I make a motion as well then? I think that, I mean, looking at the exemptions, there's certainly ones listed here that are not covered under that South Carolina code, and that concerns me, and I think we need to investigate that. So I'm not sure if we need to go line by line and review them, or if maybe that's a topic for our next meeting. So maybe I don't need to make a motion, but I just wanted to, since we're on that section of the code right now, and it's up for discussion, I think that we need to review all the other exemptions beyond just the financial advisors, because I see some other ones that, for the same rationale, we could bid them out, get competitive pricing, and I don't understand why some.
For the next meeting?
Well,
Maybe, maybe, or we can go through.
we have a light agenda left over beyond the procurement code. Robin, what time are we scheduled to end our meeting this evening? Do we have enough time on our agenda?
There is not an end time.
Okay.
We don't provide an end time.
All right. I think now, Tanya, you explained to us before that we adopt all of the exemptions that are in the state procurement code, but we're free to add our own, correct?
The district's
The
procurement code.
district.
You are free to add, edit, or delete procurement exemptions, correct, Reggie? Correct.
That's correct.
Does that address some of the things there that you're seeing or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the South Carolina code,
Yes.
and so, for example.
What page? Rach?
So that exemptions is E on page 14.
14. Okay.
And it lists South Carolina Code 59-19-270. And when I pull that up, that specifically references and ties with item 3A, but not B, C, or D. And so that's one little tiny section that it lines up with. So there's other ones here, like I mentioned, item 6, policy and legal services, the staff development items. There's things here that are obviously here for a reason, but I think we need to review whether or not they belong here as an exemption.
So, give us a specific exemption. Let's start with one.
That I think we could look at. Okay, so 6, policy legal services. So it's under exemptions. And legislative consultant is on there, advertising's on there, attorney services, court reporters, expert witnesses, bond rating services. There's also under 4, governmental services, and it lists school resource officer services. Some of these are listed here, but then I do recognize that they have come forward to us, so I don't know.
Do you have a motion for anyone you'd like to remove?
No, I'm just kind of going by how we have operated in the policy committee, where we kind of look at
Make a
them and discuss them.
recommendation?
Yeah.
How about if we give this to the staff to identify those exemptions that are not covered by the code, state code? And so we can at least have a smaller list.
Yeah.
And then if there's any historical data on when and why,
Yeah.
then
That's
we're
what-
done. And that's staff work.
Because I don't want to just cut something
Right,
if
right,
there's, you know, a specific reason
Right.
why it was there. There's,
Right.
you know, Robin always provides some really good history to us on
But
why
then-
things done, so.
But then we could kind of scope down. the
Yeah,
work.
yeah.
Look at that.
Maybe.
Well, as a board, we have, and that's that paragraph that I read before we began our procurement discussion today. We have control over this. We decide. And if the finance committee deems an item appropriate to be removed, we can give that recommendation to the board. We can't determine it, we can give it to the board to see if they support it, its removal from the exemptions list. Why,
I was gonna say, and it seemed like what you were doing was basically, you were saying it the same way how John, how we do it in the ad hoc committee. Was John basically the Chicago, the ad hoc committee, you go through and you vet it out yourself as the board, not pass it back to the employees. I think that, I don't think you never came, and I think that's where Richard was headed at, and I think that's I mean, that's just my opinion, I'm just saying, I
I
think that's
just want the board not to do the staffing of looking up which items are not, you know, I'm making an assumption that everything on the state code is authorized for non-exemption, that we wouldn't change any of those.
Right, no, but I agree, and that's
So
why
we're
I
just bringing it
agree.
down to the board.
Right, well, and in that process, I don't think that the board does that. I think that, I believe that the board looks up at how she just did it just now and how she caught that. That's that, and that will be the same reason, I believe that will be the same order that process will take place in, if I'm correct, is what Rachel was saying.
Yeah, so in the policy committee, we basically started from page 1, you know, and we started reviewing it policy by policy. However, you know, when we got started, we went to exemptions, and so I wasn't quite there ready yet for that. And I certainly can go through and match this up with the code and everything like that. But I can't sit here and do it right now.
Right, well, and then that won't give us the history or the background either, it'll just give us,
And we may not be able to get this stuff, all the history, because there may be players that, you know, are no longer with us, that it was.
John, you've had your hand up, my apologies, go ahead.
We've currently got 131 contracts that were made with exemptions. Could you ballpark what percentage that is of all the contracts that we have?
Do you have them?
I don't have that information. Reggie, would you have any ballpark idea of how many total contracts we have in the district currently?
It's depending on how many contracts there are. It might seem that it's
That's over a
Over your
four-year
penalty.
period, so that's, I'm just guessing, don't hold me to any of this, but I'd say we had, over those 4 years, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 contracts. I haven't counted, so that may not be a good number, but.
So this two-page document, these are all exempted contracts, purchases, no bid, because they were exempted. We as a board have the freedom, we can decide. We don't need to know the history. If we deem any one of these should be put out competitively, that's our decision. It's not the finance committee's decision. We can just recommend to you, the full board, okay? But that's our choice. That's our choice. Now, this procurement code, I mean, we started talking about this, start looking at it. go over it with your highlighter a month ago. If you broke it down, 10 pages a day, you would have a thorough command of what's in here. Some of it's tough to get through, I gotta tell you, because it's awfully dry. But for me, I've spent a good bit of time looking at these exemptions. I think they're problematic. And I'm just looking for a series of motions, recommendations that we can bring to the board. The board will have till July to really look over this procurement code when the finance committee brings its report. So you'll have a lot of time. Break it down, do 5 pages a day, and you'll get through it. Take your notes. Here's what I'm doing. I'm tabbing areas of interest and concern. This is a big area. It's one of the areas that, the federal investigation was looking into for our procurement, finances, some of our operations. I think we deserve as a finance committee to vet this, look at this, review it, and bring recommendations to the full board. So we've got one exemption that we're bringing to the full board thus far. And that was financial advisors. This is a low-risk endeavor, really. All we're doing is providing more competition for these areas. That's all we're doing. It may add a little more work for our procurement department as a follow-up, but that's assuming the board would adopt these. Rachel.
Ask a question. It says under 6, for exemptions, it says attorney services subject to board approval. We just had an ad hoc attorney committee choose a list of attorneys that were acceptable for the board, be as listed here under exemptions. So, I'm gonna make a motion to remove policy and legal services from exemptions. Because it's also not even showing up under, I just did a quick scan of this current contract and procurement exemptions, and there's none that even are on here presently, so I don't.
We don't have any contracts with the attorney.
Alright, well, or legal, there's a couple of things, there's advertising, primary and reinsurance covers goods and services of confidential, sensitive nature that would, there's quite a
Is
few
that your
things.
motion? What
Yes.
is your motion?
So
To
remove
remove
number
number
6,
six.
because I currently don't see anything,
Policy
so I
and
don't think it
legal
will affect
services.
anything that's presently there, but I don't see a reason to even have it.
I'll second for discussion.
Would Reggie be able to speak to that? for
Yes,
just a moment?
absolutely.
Just why we currently don't have any contracts listed on the document
Okay, yep.
For attorney,
for attorneys, yes, sir.
the district doesn't have any contracts with the attorney. The board may have, that I'm not aware of, but the district itself does not.
Yeah. So in the situation where the board recently selected a group of attorneys, how would that be handled if this were removed from it as a procurement exemption?
It wouldn't affect it, I mean, the board still has the authority to approve it.
They are own, right, and then,
Would
but
we
it
have to
has,
go out for bid on those services?
If you remove it, you would force that, I guess.
And is that customary for attorneys to bid?
It is,
A legal service.
I think maybe 7 or 8 years ago, we tried an RFP for attorney services. And we struggled for weeks with the scope of work and how we would actually package that, and that's what we're gonna ask them. Because then it would give you pricing per se. So how would you put it together? And we never put it out because we couldn't come to an agreement on what would be in the RFP as to what we'd be asking for.
Well, let me ask you a question if I may. Our bond counsel, okay, with McNair, Burt Furman, whatever their new legal firm name is, previously McNair. We do not have a contract with McNair, and yet, you know, we've been using them, I think Dr. Berg said, for 30 years. We've had the same bond counsel. I think he mentioned that the other night. So I do see bond rating services. Legislative consultant, the board does vote on our lobbying
We had a contract.
contract with.
We don't have one, not this year. We don't have one now.
We don't have
Correct.
one now. But, you know, if we did, it should be competitively, you know, looked at. So
I'm not sure what advertising
advertising, I don't know.
Well, for instance, we advertise bids all the time, and we wouldn't have an opportunity to go out for bid every time we wanted to advertise. We advertise for whatever the local media is, so that's exempt for that reason. There's no way you could just,
I thought there was certain,
you'd be constantly doing that if you do that every time.
We'd be then subject to getting 3 quotes, if it's over $2,500. So
Every time you advertise a position, you would have to.
So for example, the superintendent search, there were certain media outlets, say the Chicago Tribune or the LA Times, whose pricing was $6,000 for a 2-month or 1 week or whatever advertisement. We would have to bid out different, and you won't have competitive advertising within the Chicago area, that sort of thing. So
The market research is more important than actually who you use.
you're almost hand selecting which advertisement agencies you want to focus on to attract geographical areas, so.
I mean, I'm ready to your question.
Well, do you have a question?
I thought it was a previous motion before the y'all vote on.
We voted on the last one to send the recommendation
Yes.
forward on the
That was the only
financial
motion.
advisors.
Yes.
Is that the one?
No, I thought it was a financial advisor. I thought it wasn't, what, you didn't make another motion after that?
Let me see, I'm checking off here.
Policy and legal services.
That's a motion right now. It's on the
That's a
floor.
motion on the floor.
I postponed there was a motion to postpone the finance meeting update till July, a motion to remove the financial advisors as an exemption, motion to, Rachel's motion for the
Policy and legal services.
procurement controls and compliance audit. That's it thus far.
And so the motion right now is your motion, or, because.
It's Rachel.
It's Rachel's. Okay,
on exemption 6,
exemption number 6.
which we can splice it up and keep certain ones or whatnot, it's just, some of them did not make sense to me based on the way we have been operating currently. And I don't see any current contracts, I didn't think there would be any conflicts with anything that we have right now. But I'm hearing otherwise, so.
It may not be a contract, it may be an actual purchase, like advertisement wouldn't be a contract, so it would be on this list, but we may actually have made a payment on P-card, for example, to Hackett or the state newspaper or that sort of thing.
Services that are confidential. It sounds like the only sticking point there was advertising. That's the one that might trip you up the most.
Insurance coverage, I believe that we do bid some insurance out.
We have bid some, we did some as well.
Okay.
I'd like that one to stay. So is advertising the big sticking point for you? It would prohibit the procurement department from freely advertising on a regular basis? What would that do? How much would that clip your wings there? The rest of it seems reasonable to me, to remove as an exemption. How often are we advertising? What are we talking about here, Reggie? To give us an idea about, is that something we're doing, multiple times a week?
Yeah, we do it almost daily, we have some sort of advertising.
And they would be in the context of what, give me some examples if you could.
Hiring personnel. So we advertise for hiring staff members. We advertise for RFPs. So in order to do an RFP, we have to advertise it in multiple installations, required by law to do that as well. Advertising, superintendent search sort of things,
Well,
special instances like that.
Yeah. Tina.
I can just tell you from my perspective on the legal services, I think that would be very hard to do. At least I can tell you from the Board of Education side as opposed to the district side, that you've got to first determine which attorneys, have the qualifications, expertise, whatever it is that your particularly problem is. Like, for example, let's say the superintendent's contract. We had decided we would like to have somebody who's experienced in that field. And then some of them, when I did the vetting, were eliminated for the board because they were currently working for the district on certain issues. And so I think it would be very hard to do for attorneys. The idea of sending it out for bids is to get a good bid, so you would have to actually investigate. I did a lot of legwork to find out who we should use for the superintendent's contract, and to find out, pricing, et cetera. So I think if you send out a bid, there may be one, you may not get anybody bidding on it. I think that's kind of a weird way to do a professional fee of an attorney. I think that'd be a weird way to do professional fees for physicians, and that's one of the exemptions, but I don't, know all the South Carolina State Procurement Code. These are just my thoughts kind of off the top. I think it would be hard to do it, and to really get, you're looking to try to get the best qualified attorney at a good price, but if you're just bidding it, I don't know, that just seems like, well, they can say, yeah, I'm licensed, and, I passed the bar in that state, so, yeah, I'm qualified to do whatever you're asking, whereas they might not, I don't know, it just seems
Well,
kind of a odd way to do it.
points well received.
Okay.
Something to remember, again, we're just putting in front of the board. And that the board members will have their opportunity in July when we summarize this meeting and everything encompassed to make that determination. You'll also have time to research it a little bit more as well. So it's a no risk, if the finance committee deems this suitable to put